It is Saturday morning, April 26th, 2003. A 27-year-old man is driving alone through the desert of southeastern Utah. The landscape around him is extraordinary. Red rock formations, vast open sky, the kind of ancient, indifferent beauty that makes human beings feel very small and very alive at the same time. He has done this before. He knows this country. He loves it. He parks his truck at the trailhead, grabs his pack, and heads into the canyon. He has not told anyone where he is going. This detail, so small, so ordinary, the kind of thing any of us might do on a solo weekend trip, will nearly kill him. 6 hours later, he is standing in a narrow slot canyon, maybe 3 feet wide, when an 800-pound boulder shifts without warning and falls. His right hand is between the boulder and the canyon wall. The rock stops. His hand does not come free. He tries to pull it out. He cannot. He tries to move the boulder. He cannot. He tries everything he can think of, methodically, for hours, and nothing works. The canyon is remote. No one knows he is here. The walls around him are maybe shoulder width apart, the sky a thin strip of blue far above. He has water for about a day. He has food for less than that. He has a small, cheap multi-tool with a dull 2-inch blade. He is not going anywhere. What Aron Ralston did over the next 127 hours, the decisions he made, the things he endured, and ultimately the act of almost unimaginable will that got him out of that canyon, is one of the most extraordinary survival stories in modern history. But it is also something more than a survival story. It is a story about what it takes to truly face yourself when there is nowhere left to run. About what you find when everything has been stripped away. About the moment when a human being decides, with complete clarity and complete terror, that they are going to live. This is the full story of Aron Ralston. To understand what Aron Ralston was doing alone in a Utah slot canyon on a Saturday in April, you have to understand who he was and what the outdoors meant to him. Aron Ralston was born on October 27, 1975, in Marion, Ohio. He was, from early in his life, someone who needed to move. Not restless in an aimless way, focused, driven, goal-oriented. He excelled academically, studied mechanical engineering and French at Carnegie Mellon University, and graduated with honors. He took a job with Intel in Phoenix, Arizona, working as an engineer. From the outside, this looked like the beginning of a conventional, successful professional life. But Ralston had discovered, by his early 20s, that the outdoors, specifically the mountains and canyon country of the American West, was not a hobby for him. It was a necessity. It was where he felt most fully alive. He climbed. He hiked. He skied. He canyoneered. He pursued these activities with the same methodical intensity he brought to engineering, setting ambitious goals, researching routes, developing skills, pushing into increasingly remote and technically demanding terrain. By 2002, he had made a decision that most people in his position would not make. He quit his job at Intel. He moved to Aspen, Colorado, where he took a job at an outdoor gear shop that paid a fraction of his engineering salary but left him with time and access to pursue his real passion. He was working through a self-assigned project to climb all 59 of Colorado's 14ers, the peaks above 14,000 feet, solo and in winter conditions. He had completed 45 of them. He was, in other words, not a reckless amateur playing at outdoor adventure. He was an experienced, technically skilled outdoorsman who had been operating in serious mountain and canyon terrain for years. He understood risk. He carried appropriate equipment for most of his outings. He was not careless, but he had a habit that, in retrospect, was a serious vulnerability. He often went alone, and he did not always tell people where he was going. This is not unusual among serious solo outdoor adventurers. There is a freedom in going without an itinerary, without a schedule, without the obligation of checking in. The solo wilderness experience is, For many people, specifically about the solitude and the self-reliance, the sense of existing for a few hours or days entirely on your own terms. Ralston understood the risks of solo travel in remote terrain. He had made calculated judgments about those risks many times before. He was good enough and experienced enough that those judgments had always worked out. On April 26, 2003, he drove to Canyonlands National Park in southeastern Utah. His plan for the day was a circuit through Bluejohn Canyon, a narrow slot canyon in the remote canyon country west of Moab, followed by a long bike ride back to his truck. He expected to be back by evening. It was a long day, but well within his capabilities. He packed light, a small amount of food, 2 burritos, and some snack food, about a liter of water, a climbing harness and rope, a headlamp, a video camera, a digital camera, and a small Leatherman multi-tool, a pocket-sized device with a knife blade, pliers, and various small tools. The knife blade was about 2 inches long and not particularly sharp. He did not call anyone to say where he was going. His housemates in Aspen did not know his plans for the weekend. His family did not know. He locked his truck and headed into the canyon. Bluejohn Canyon is a slot canyon, one of the extraordinary geological features of the Colorado Plateau, where water has carved narrow passages through sandstone over millions of years. In places, the walls are only a few feet apart, rising hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. The light that reaches the bottom is filtered, indirect, amber-colored. The rock is smooth and sculpted, carved into curves and hollows that look almost deliberate. It is beautiful. It is also, in its narrower sections, a place where you are entirely dependent on the specific geometry of the rock around you. Ralston had been moving through the canyon for several hours, making good time, enjoying the solitude and the extraordinary landscape. He was descending through a particularly narrow section when he came to a boulder, a large, rounded chunk of sandstone wedged across the canyon about 8 feet above the floor. This kind of feature is common in slot canyons. Boulders get wedged as they fall, creating chalkstones that climbers and canyoneers have to navigate, sometimes climbing over them, sometimes around them, sometimes descending below them using the canyon walls as support. Ralston had done this many times before. He tested the boulder, as any experienced canyoneer would, checking its stability before committing his weight to it. It seemed solid. He began to lower himself past it. As he descended, the boulder shifted. What happened next took less than a second. The 800-pound rock, dislodged by his movement or by some internal instability that had been waiting to release, fell. Ralston's right hand was between the boulder and the canyon wall. The rock came to rest. His hand did not come free. He was standing on the canyon floor, facing the wall, his right arm raised and pinned at the wrist. The boulder was pressing his hand flat against the sandstone. He could not pull it out. The weight was not compressive in a way that threatened his immediate survival. He was not being crushed, but the position was absolute. He could not move the boulder. He could not extract his hand. He stood there for a moment, absorbing what had happened. Then he began to work. The first hours were methodical. He examined the situation from every angle. He tried to chip away at the boulder with his multi-tool. Sandstone is softer than granite, but still stone, and his small blade made almost no impression. He tried to use his climbing gear to rig a pulley system, attaching ropes to the boulder and using the mechanical advantage of the system to try to shift it even slightly. The boulder did not move. He tried to chip away at the canyon wall where his hand was pinned, reasoning that if he could create even a centimeter of additional space, he might be able to extract it. The wall was harder than the boulder. He made no progress. He screamed for help. The narrow canyon walls absorbed his voice. No one was nearby. No one was coming. By the end of the first day, Aron Ralston had exhausted every immediate option he could think of. His hand was not coming free. The boulder was not moving. He was alone in a canyon that nobody knew he was in. He settled in for the night, standing against the canyon wall, his right arm raised, and began to think about what he was going to do. Time moves differently when you are trapped. This is one of the things Ralston wrote and spoke about most vividly in the years after his rescue. The texture of those 5 days, the way each hour had a different quality, the way his mind moved through hope and despair and calculation and memory and a kind of strange, suspended clarity that he had never experienced before. The first day had been about problem solving. The second day was about rationing. He had roughly 350 milliliters of water left. He had drunk most of his supply in the initial hours of trying to free himself. He had 2 burritos and some snack food. He was going to have to make these last as long as possible, which meant confronting the arithmetic of his situation with uncomfortable honesty. How long could he survive? Without water, in the desert, the answer is measured in days. 3 days, perhaps 4. The April temperatures in the Utah Canyon country were not the extreme summer heat of July. Daytime temperatures were manageable and nights were cold, but dehydration in any desert environment is a reliable killer. He began rationing immediately and strictly. Small sips of water, spaced hours apart. Tiny amounts of food. He had to keep his body functional for as long as possible, even as he faced the possibility that functional might not be enough. He had his video camera. This detail, that Ralston filmed himself during those 5 days, is one of the most remarkable aspects of the story and one of the most humanizing. The footage, which he has shared selectively in interviews and which Danny Boyle used in reconstructing the film, shows a man who is frightened and exhausted and increasingly desperate, but who is also, somehow, still himself. He talks to the camera. He makes dark jokes. He tells his family he loves them. He documents what is happening with a precision that speaks to his engineering mind, even in extremity. On the second day, he tried again to chip at the rock in the wall. He tried to use his body weight differently. He tried every variation of the pulley system he could devise. Nothing changed. The third day brought a new development, and a terrible one. His hand, pressed against the rock, was losing circulation. The tissue was beginning to die. He could smell it, the specific, unmistakable smell of necrosis, of flesh that is no longer alive. His hand was dying while he was still attached to it. This changed the calculus in a specific and horrifying way. Even if he found a way to free himself after a certain point, the hand would be gone regardless. The question was shifting from how to save the hand to how to save the arm, and from how to save the arm to how to save the life. He understood this. He was trained in first aid. He knew what he was smelling. He began to think, for the first time, about amputation. But he rejected it, not from denial, but from a practical assessment. His multi-tool had a small, dull blade. To amputate a human arm above the wrist requires cutting through skin, muscle, tendons, blood vessels, and most critically, bone. The blade could not cut bone. He tried pressing it against his arm to test the idea and concluded that it was not possible. He continued to ration. He continued to try to chip at the rock. He slept standing up or sitting on a small ledge he had carved into the wall, his arm raised above him, the boulder immovable beside him. The nights were cold. The days were bright and thin in the narrow canyon. He urinated into his water bottle when the water ran out, not because he believed it would sustain him, but because the act of doing something, of continuing to respond to his situation rather than simply waiting, mattered to him. On the fourth day, he did something that he has described as the moment he accepted that he was going to die. He took his multi-tool and carved into the sandstone wall of the canyon, directly in front of him. Aron. Oct 75. And then, below his birth month and year, the date he believed he would die, April 2003. He filmed a final video message to his parents and his sister. He told them he loved them. He thanked them. He said goodbye. And then he sat in the canyon and waited. But something in him was not done. The fifth day. Ralston has described the hours before his decision as a kind of altered state, the product of dehydration, exhaustion, caloric deprivation, and the psychological extremity of 5 days alone in a canyon with a dead hand pinned to a rock. He was not hallucinating in the clinical sense, but his mind was moving in ways it had never moved before, more associative, more visual, more open to things that his ordinarily rational, engineering-trained brain would have quickly rationalized away. And he had a vision. He saw, with extraordinary clarity and detail, a small child, a boy, 3 or 4 years old, running across a sunlit floor toward him. He reached down and scooped the child up with his left arm, his free arm. The child laughed. He did not know, in that moment, who the child was. He had no children. He was not in a relationship. But the vision was so vivid, so specific, so emotionally overwhelming that it hit him like a physical force. He believed he was seeing his future son, a son he had not yet had, a son who would exist only if he got out of this canyon. In the years since, he has spoken about this vision with a consistency that suggests it was genuinely formative, not a story he added later for emotional impact, but the actual pivot point of those 5 days. The moment when the question stopped being whether he would survive and became how. He looked at his arm. He had tried, earlier, to determine whether he could cut through it. He had concluded he could not cut the bone. But now, in this depleted, stripped-down, post-vision state, he thought about it differently. He bent his arm against the boulder, applying torque, using the rock itself as a fulcrum. And he felt, or thought he felt, something give slightly. He applied more pressure. His radius, one of the two bones in the forearm, snapped. He applied the torque in the other direction. His ulna snapped. Both forearm bones were now broken, just above where they were pinned by the boulder. His arm was held in place by the remaining soft tissue, muscle, tendon, skin, and the bone ends that had not yet fully separated. He reached for his multi-tool. What followed took approximately 1 hour. He has described it in his memoir with a clinical precision that is, in its way, more disturbing than any amount of graphic detail could be. He cut through muscle. He cut through tendon. He cut through the nerve bundles, which produced pain of a kind he has described as completely outside his previous experience of pain. He cut through the skin. At 11:32 in the morning on April 30th, 2003, Aron Ralston pulled his arm free from the boulder and stood alone in the canyon with a self-administered below-the-elbow amputation, losing blood, in the middle of one of the most remote landscapes in the American Southwest. He took a photograph of the boulder. Then he began to get out. This part of the story is, in some ways, as extraordinary as the amputation itself. Because getting free from the boulder was not the end of what Ralston had to do. It was, in a sense, the beginning of the next problem. He was now a one-handed man, losing blood, severely dehydrated and malnourished after 5 days without adequate food or water, standing at the bottom of a slot canyon in the Utah desert with no one knowing where he was. He had to get out. He used his remaining supplies to improvise a tourniquet and a bandage for the stump. He drank the last of the liquid he had, the urine he had been collecting. He shouldered his pack. And then he had to rappel. Below the point where he had been trapped, the canyon dropped 65 feet in a technical rappel, a section that required roping down a vertical face. He had done this with 2 hands on the way in. He now had one. He rigged his rope with his left hand and his teeth. He descended the rappel. 65 feet of vertical canyon wall, one-handed, bleeding, with whatever remained of his physical reserves powering each movement. At the bottom, he began to hike out. The route back to the trailhead was approximately 8 miles through canyon country in direct sunlight, with temperatures approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. He was walking on terrain that required careful footing, loose rock, sand, uneven surfaces. He was moving as fast as he could, which was not very fast. He was losing blood through the improvised bandage. He was consuming the last of his energy reserves. He kept moving. After approximately 5 miles, something happened that must have felt like a hallucination but was real. He came around a bend in the canyon and encountered a family, a Dutch couple and their young son, who had been hiking in the area. They had food and water and a phone. They gave him what they had and called for help. The rescue helicopter reached him approximately 45 minutes later. By the time he arrived at the hospital in Moab, Aron Ralston had been without adequate food or water for 5 days, had performed a below-the-elbow self-amputation with a dull multi-tool, had descended a 65-foot rappel one-handed, and had hiked 5 miles through the desert. He had lost, by medical estimates, approximately 25% of his blood volume. He was alive. At the hospital, doctors assessed the damage and confirmed what Ralston already knew. The hand, dead from days of severed circulation, would have been unsalvageable regardless. The amputation had been, in the most literal sense, the only option. His family arrived. His friends arrived. The news arrived. And 6 days after a boulder had pinned him in a slot canyon in Utah, Aron Ralston began the long process of understanding what had happened to him and what he was going to do about it. Recovery from what Ralston experienced was not a simple process, and he has never pretended otherwise. The physical recovery was extensive. The amputation required surgical revision. The ragged, self-performed cut needed to be properly shaped and closed for a prosthetic fitting. There was extensive rehabilitation. Learning to operate in the world without a dominant hand is a process that takes months and involves relearning things so basic that most people never think about them. How to tie shoes, how to cook, how to type, how to climb. Because he was absolutely going to climb again. This was never seriously in question for Ralston. The outdoors was not something he was willing to surrender because of what had happened in that canyon. If anything, the experience had deepened his relationship with the mountains and the desert in a way that made returning to them more necessary, not less. He returned to climbing within months of the amputation. He completed the remaining 14 of Colorado's 59 14ers, the project he had been working on before the accident, and finished the full list. He continued to ski, to kayak, to pursue the full range of outdoor activities that had defined his adult life. He also returned to Bluejohn Canyon. Approximately a week after his rescue, with his arms still in bandages, he went back to the canyon with a team that included the medical examiner and a crew who had come to retrieve his hand. The boulder was eventually moved. It took a small group of people and mechanical assistance, and his hand was recovered. He had it cremated, and he scattered the ashes himself. He has described this return as necessary, not for closure in any simple sense, but as an act of completion. The canyon had taken something from him. He went back to take something from the canyon in return: his hand, his story, his full understanding of what had happened there. He wrote his memoir, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, published in 2004. The book is remarkable for its honesty and its lack of self-mythologizing. Ralston does not present himself as a superhero or a saint. He describes the fear, the poor decision-making that put him in the situation, the moments of despair, the vision, the cutting, all of it with a directness that makes the reader feel uncomfortably present in that canyon. He also addresses, with notable candor, the responsibility question. He had gone without telling anyone where he was. He acknowledges this was a serious mistake, not a romantic act of lone wolf independence, but a decision that could easily have cost him his life and did cost him his hand. He does not excuse it. He does not romanticize it. He says, "I made a bad decision, and I was extraordinarily lucky that I survived it." This honesty is part of what makes the book and his public presence valuable beyond the drama of the survival story itself. The film adaptation, 127 Hours, was released in 2007. Director Danny Boyle, who had previously made Trainspotting and Slumdog Millionaire, brought a visceral, sensory intensity to the material that earned James Franco an Academy Award nomination for his portrayal of Ralston. The amputation sequence in the film famously caused viewers to faint in theaters, not because of graphic gore, but because of the psychological reality of what Franco conveyed. Ralston was involved in the production and has spoken positively about the film's faithfulness to his experience. The vision of the child, which could easily have been cut as too mystical or sentimental, was kept because Ralston insisted it was real and central. The son in that vision exists now. Ralston married and has a son named Leo. He has spoken about the specific quality of holding Leo for the first time, the recognition, the confirmation of a vision that sustained him in the canyon. He continues to climb, to speak publicly about his experience, and to live, fully and deliberately, the outdoor life that he chose and that the canyon almost ended. In his talks and his memoir, Ralston returns repeatedly to a set of ideas that the canyon forced into clarity for him. They are not complicated ideas, but they are ones that most of us spend a great deal of energy avoiding. The first is the idea of responsibility. Not responsibility in a punishing sense, not self-flagellation for the mistake of going without telling anyone, but responsibility in the deeper sense, the understanding that your choices have consequences, that those consequences extend to the people who love you, and that genuine independence includes the obligation to protect the people who would be devastated by your loss. He has become, since the accident, an advocate for the simple practice of letting someone know where you are going. Not because adventure is dangerous and should be avoided, because it is dangerous and should be respected. The second idea is about the relationship between control and surrender. Ralston spent the first 4 days in the canyon trying to control the situation, working the problem, applying his engineering intelligence to every possible approach, refusing to accept that there was nothing more to try. This was not wrong. The systematic problem-solving was necessary and correct, but it was not sufficient. What freed him, ultimately, was not a technical solution. It was a surrender of a different kind, the surrender of the assumption that his hand could be saved. Once he let go of that assumption, the actual solution became visible. The bone could be broken. The tissue could be cut. The hand was already dead. The question was not how to save it, but how to leave it behind. This is a pattern that appears, in various forms, in most serious survival stories. The moment of genuine problem-solving is often preceded by a moment of genuine acceptance of the situation as it actually is, not as we wish it were. As long as we are fighting the reality, we cannot work with it. The third idea is about what remains when everything else is gone. Ralston went into that canyon as an accomplished, self-sufficient, capable person. He came out as a person who had discovered, in the most literal possible way, the exact boundary of what self-sufficiency can do. There was a point, a very clear, very specific point on the fourth day when he carved his name in the wall, where his capabilities were exhausted, where everything he knew how to do had been tried and had failed. And in that emptiness, something else came through. The vision of a child, the thought of his family, the tether of love and connection that he had not brought with him consciously, but that was there anyway, underneath everything, waiting. He has said that he was not a religious man before the canyon and is not straightforwardly a religious man after it. But he is honest about the fact that the vision of his son was not something he produced from his own resources. It came from somewhere else, from some part of himself or some part of the universe that he does not fully understand and does not try to explain away. It came when he needed it. It told him what he had to live for. And it was right. There is a boulder in Bluejohn Canyon in Utah. It has been moved from where it fell in April 2003. The retrieval of Ralston's hand required moving it, but it is still there, still in the canyon, a piece of sandstone that weighs 800 pounds and that briefly held a man's life in the balance. The canyon itself is unchanged. Slot canyons do not remember what passes through them. The water that carved those walls over millions of years did not pause for Aron Ralston, and the rock does not carry his story in any way that a geologist would detect. He was there. He left a name carved in the wall, and his blood on the rock, and that is all. But he came out. He came out because he was skilled and prepared and methodical and refused to stop trying. He came out because of a vision of a child who did not yet exist. He came out because two Dutch tourists happened to be hiking in the same canyon on the same morning. He came out because, when the moment arrived, he was willing to do the thing that needed to be done, the thing so extreme that most people, told about it in advance, would say they could never do it. He broke his own bones and cut off his own hand and walked out of the desert. And then, this is the part that matters as much as anything, he went back. Not to the same mistake, not to the same recklessness, but to the mountains and the canyons and the desert, to the life he had chosen, to the thing that made him most fully himself. He has a son named Leo. He holds him with his left arm and his prosthetic right. Leo, who existed first as a vision in a canyon, is real now, running across sunlit floors, laughing, doing what small children do. Aron Ralston sees him and knows, with a certainty that goes all the way down, why he cut through that tendon and that nerve and that skin on the morning of April 30th, 2003. It was for this. It was always for this. Thank you for watching. Aron Ralston's story is one that I think gets more powerful the more honestly you examine it. Not just the survival, but the vision, the responsibility, the return. If this resonated with you, share it with someone. Subscribe for the next story. And leave a comment. What part of this story hit you the hardest? The amputation? The vision of his son? Or the fact that he went back to climbing? I want to know.